Hey guys, this is Marcus from Core. This video is going to be about the potential trail closures and the travel management process that's currently going on just outside and around Moab, Utah. That's a BLM travel management project. So this video is going to be a little bit long. There's a lot of depth to this stuff. It doesn't really fit into, what we're used to right now. Seeing information, scroll through our feeds, watching things. The context that'll go along with this video is definitely not going to fit into 140 characters or less. And this video is not going to be 3 minutes long or less. We're already well beyond that. And why is this important to you? Well, I always say this. There's only two types of off-roaders in the world. There are those of us that have been to Moab and probably been to Moab many times, and those of us that want to go to Moab. And so this is really the mecca for off-roading, the place, at the epicenter of everything that's going on in off-roading. You'll see companies talking about testing in Moab. I see concepts, different vehicle manufacturers, people tire testing, parts testing. It really is the center of things that happen in and around the off-road world. There's a lot of other cool places to go in the country, but there is nothing like what we have in Moab. And that's why this is hugely important. So you've likely seen things on social media alluding to potential trail closures or travel management. I've seen stuff pop up in social media posts, in shares, in people's stories. There's a real big buzz going on right now about what's happening in Moab. And so what we always do here at Core is we always try and break everything down as far as potential trail closures and agency projects, so that you can do, really three things. The first one is that we bring you context and a full picture of information of what's going on. That way you know the background, you know the positives, you know the negatives, you know what's going on. And then we ask you to make comments based on what's going on. And then there's a third piece, and that's then to share that information so that other people can start that three-step process. Unfortunately, that just takes time, and the deadline for comments on this project are October 7th, so that's not very far from now. That's okay. We've plenty of time to still make comments. It's not a race, but sometimes that process gets diverted, and you'll see information. There'll be a lot of buzz. There's some confusion about it, and I see people posting it all over. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to be real. Posting things on social media about trails closing does not keep trails open. Getting likes, getting views, having organic reach, getting interactions. The BLM doesn't track any of that stuff when they make decisions for travel management. What they track is substantial input that people give them back to their process to influence, how they navigate through the process, ultimately to a decision. And that's what we've always tried to do. And I say we because this video is brought to you by several different groups that have been doing a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to dig into every level of this project to get the information that you're going to see in this video. And that is Trails Preservation Alliance, TPA. They've done a ton of work. Ride with Respect out there in Utah. CoveCo, Colorado Off-Road Trail Defenders here in Colorado. And then also us, Core, based here in Colorado. It takes a lot of time to go through an environmental assessment document, which this is a draft environmental assessment. That's where we're at now in the process of the Gemini Bridges Labyrinth Rims travel management. It takes a ton of time to work through that, to find what's going on, to see mapping errors, to see discrepancies, to correct all of those, to work with the BLM to get it figured out so we actually know what we have and what we need to comment on. So I said earlier that we're in the draft environmental assessment piece of travel management. And we showed you also, and flash it up here again, where exactly that is in the process. Now don't get confused, an environmental assessment it's not talking about like environmentalism or, that Al Gore thought that the polar ice caps would be all melted, 9 years ago. It's about studying the environment of what a decision would impact. So they're not planning to do this, thankfully, but let's say they closed every single mile of trails in this travel management area. What would that decision do? What would that do to the landscape? What would that do to the economics? What would that do to the visitation? What would that do to the recreational experience and the access to public lands to participate in other forms of recreation? What would that do to wildlife? What would all of the impacts be on an environmental, very large scale if they made a decision? So that's why they call it an environmental assessment. They're assessing the overall environment and what their alternatives would do based on that decision that they are going to make. There's another important piece going on here that you should know about, and kind of the long-term history of this travel management project, and then other people that are being involved in this travel management project. So, if we go here to the introduction of, the EA that the BLM has on the project page, we're talking about 1,232 miles of inventoried routes, and that covers, almost 304,000 acres. And that's, the trail, all of the road and trail mileage inventoried for this project, and then how large of a project area that they're looking at, that those road and trails are within. But what's not being discussed about this project that is very, very important is that the BLM already did a travel management project for Labyrinth rims and Gemini bridges in this same area. And they did that in 2008. And what happened in 2008 was that they identified 1,900 miles of roads and trails, and they actually forgot to inventory 200 miles of roads and trails. So this same project area had 2,100 miles of roads and trails that you could travel in 2008. And then they ended up closing 800 miles of them through the 2008 travel management project. So there has already been a 40% reduction in roads and trails in this project area with a recent decision. That was not good enough for certain groups that sued the BLM because they didn't close enough roads. And the BLM settled the suit, and the settlement agreement was that they would redo travel management in this area. And that's where we're at today. So it's not just about these 1,200 miles that we're talking about in this travel management project. We actually had 2,100 miles of roads and trails in this area in 2008. And then because of mapping errors and routes that didn't get on the inventory, we already lost 200. So it was down to 1,900 miles of roads and trails. And then through that project, they closed 800 of them. So that's what's so frustrating about this, is that we already lost a huge amount of roads and trails here. That wasn't good enough. And again, I can't stress that enough. It will never be enough closures, which is why we can't accept any closures, because it's never going to be enough. The groups that don't want us out there are never going to say, we got enough, the rest is okay, go out and have your fun. That will never happen. And so when the BLM agreed to redo this via settlement agreement, now we're entered back into the process. And here's the thing. This gets a little bit twisted and it's somewhat complex, so we'll try and simplify it down. But we, the American people, are the owners of public lands. And the agencies many times say that. They even have hashtags and catchphrases that say, it's all yours. Go out and enjoy your public lands, right? So we are the rightful owners of public lands, the people. And then we are also the rightful keepers of the government of the people. So, you have federal employees of the government that are running this travel management project. That is the BLM. During the project, you have an opportunity, or the project itself has an opportunity for what's called cooperating agencies participation. Now, cooperating agency can be another government entity that comes in and participates because they either have an interest in the area or they have some other affiliation in the area with the travel, with whatever project it is. In this case, it's travel management. So Grand County, the Grand County Commission, participated in this project as a cooperating agency. And they sent a letter to the BLM that wants even more trail closures than what has currently already happened in 2008 and that was initially proposed in the scoping period of this process. So think about that. I mean, you have publicly elected officials that are then trying to leverage their desires for public land. There's 330 plus million Americans, and we're all public landowners, and we all have a right to enjoy public land for any number of reasons. And so, you win a simple majority, right? If you're voted in, that's 51% of votes, then you're elected to public office in elections up and down the board. Now, what can't happen is 51% of the people voting for somebody to then make them enforce a policy for the other 49%. That's not how it's supposed to work here, because that's called mob rule, where 51% of the people can make the other 49% do what they want. But let's take it a step further. In the case of Grand County, the Grand County Commission, trying to leverage their opinion to get the BLM to do what they want, that takes a very small group, and they're trying to leverage that to make the federal government do what they want for all Americans. We all have a say in public lands. It doesn't matter if you live in Grand County or even in the state of Utah. Those are public lands. So when a small local group wins a political majority and tries to do something that will affect all Americans, that is absolutely not right. And that is elitism. That is the absolute textbook definition of elitism. They don't like what we do. They don't like our chosen form of recreation, and they can't handle it. And so the option they have chosen is try to make it illegal or against the rules for you to go out and do something. A very small group of people trying to enforce their opinion onto you and make you abide by their rules. That's why this should be so upsetting to everyone, for the laundry list of reasons. We already lost a huge number of routes in 2008, either by error or by the process in general, and that wasn't good enough. And now here we are, where a small group of people in Utah want all public land users to lose even more routes, and very important, very highly known routes. That is unacceptable. So just listen to this list. If Grand County got their way, they would close Hey Joe Canyon, Hell Roaring Canyon, Gold Spike, Gold Bar Rim, Rusty Nail, Day Canyon Point, Dead Man Point, Bull Canyon, 10 Mile Canyon, 3D, Mashed Potatoes, plus Dead Cow, the Tube's motorcycle trails, parts of Where Eagles Dare, Buttes and Towers, Wipeout Hill, and 7 Mile Rim. And they think that's reasonable for them to interject their opinion to BLM to close some of the most popular trails in the entire country, as if that's not going to negatively affect you, me, and a whole bunch of other people that visit there every single year. So in the alternatives they're considering, alternative A, which is the no action alternative, that's basically what we have right now on the ground. That's current travel management. They account for 1,056 miles of roads and trails. And in alternative A, there's no trail closures, because again, that's what we have out there now. Alternative B, this is the one Grand County wants, 437.8 miles of trail closures. That's what they're asking for. Over 40%, 43% of the roads and trails out there, they want closed. Then there's alternative C. That would close 167 miles of trails. And then there's alternative D, And somehow they're calling this the pro-motorized alternative. And that would close 52.5 miles of trails. And that brings up another point. We need to tell the BLM they should not use language just to throw words out. Words have meaning. A pro-motorized alternative that closes 52 miles of trails is mislabeled. There is nothing pro-motorized about closing 52 miles of trails. The BLM also says that they've seen an 80% increase in users there over the past several years. So an increase in users, and it's pro-motorized to decrease trail mileage. There's nothing pro-motorized about that. If they wanted to examine a broad range of alternatives, then they would actually analyze an alternative that increased trail mileage. That would go with an increase in use in the area. And that is required by NEPA, the NEPA process, to examine a broad range of alternatives. How is a travel management plan not pre-decisional when every single alternative closes trails? There's no other option. And that also prejudiced the project, because then it seems like the only option to manage what they want is to close trails, and that motorized use is a net negative, because the only reasonable alternative then is to close trails. And the unfortunate part of this process is it's riddled with errors. The original GIS data didn't match the maps that were online. And actually, it still doesn't match the maps right now. Patrick from Colorado Off-Road Trail Defenders has been lighting them up via email and phone calls trying to get the right data. How can we comment on a project when we don't even have the right data and know what we're commenting on? And even now they've supposedly corrected the actual GIS data. So if you download the data and plot it in a GIS software package like Google Earth or another one, you can see the routes on the ground there. But the maps that are online that you can look at as part of the project on the project page still don't accurately reflect the GIS data. That is another huge issue. And then in the public meeting the other night, the BLM representative continues to claim that alternatives C and D do not close Jeep Safari routes. And that is not true. And they don't understand what Safari does, the routes they use, and the routes that are important to the public. That's very obvious. They also can't even get their act together with their own GIS data, which makes it nearly impossible for the public to decipher what's going on when we don't even know what they mean. And here's why all the groups that I mentioned earlier go through all this stuff with a fine-tooth comb, and why it takes us a while to put all this information together sometimes. Because there's a number of documents that are always cited by a government agency when they do this project. At the very end, there'll be pages and pages and pages of references. And sometimes it's studies, sometimes it's surveys, sometimes it's a whole host of things. And they do that because they're bound by NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act that they have to follow. And that requires them to use the best science available. And they'll do what I call burying you in paperwork. So for the most part, the casual user will never go through all of the references and look anything up. And they actually hope that you don't, and here's why. Look at this. So there was a 2007 survey that is cited 11 different times in this EA. Now, a survey that is a survey of science is not science. They're just surveying science and then placing it in here as science. But let's take it a step further. That survey of science included a 1980 survey, which is pretty old, but good science is good science. It doesn't matter when it is. But the 1980, go back first. The 2007 survey that they mention in here 11 different times, the environmental effects of off-highway vehicles on Bureau of Land Management lands, a literature synthesis, annotated bibliographies, and extensive bibliographies and internet resources. Okay, that sounds serious, right? That's a jumble of really big words. So maybe you would just take it as, I should just believe what they say because they're bound by using the best science available. Well, in that 2007 survey, they included this 1980 survey. And the 1980 survey is off-road vehicle use, a management challenge. Again, sounds very specific, sounds like something that is credible information. And this is the page, the very first page that you're seeing on this, excuse me. What you're seeing on the screen there is page 2 of this document. Do you want to know what page 1 of this document is? Page 1 of the document, historic archive document. Do not assume content reflects current scientific knowledge, policies, or practices. So that document comes with a warning label on the very front of it, telling them not to use this information and not to assume anything by using this information. And yet that was part of a 2007 USGS survey that is then cited 11 times in this environmental assessment. That's unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. A survey of science is not science, and a survey telling you not to use this as science is certainly not science. The other thing that I've heard a lot with this travel management project is that when you look at the aerial map, it looks like there are roads and trails everywhere. And you can see here, I mean, it just looks like there's roads and trails everywhere. So to the unknowing viewer who's never been out on all of those trails, and remember that really means a lot of land managers, honestly, they think that there's roads everywhere and that there's just motorized vehicles driving all over the place, and people who want this area closed even drum that up all the time. There's motorized abuse everywhere. There's vehicles everywhere. They're driving all over the place. They're destroying everything. That is absolutely false. And I'll show you how it's false. Because things are not always as they seem. In order to create a travel management map to encompass the entire area, they have to make the roads and trails seem bigger and bolder than they actually are. Because the Green River is actually in this map too. Can you see the Green River anywhere? Can you make that out from the vantage point that we have right now? You can clearly make out every road and trail, but you can't see the Green River, which is 10 vehicles wide in many cases, probably even more. So then when we zoom in, then you can see the scale of the Green River. And so if you don't know any better, it looks like there are roads and trails everywhere and that there's duplicates. And they'll say, well, there's 2 roads that go to the same place. That's not true. There's too many roads in a square mile area. They're very too close together. That's not true. It just looks that way based on the maps. And I'm not saying that BLM should change the way that they are depicting these trails, but it allows other people to take advantage of that situation to try and push their view on unknowing people to think, oh my gosh, there's driving all over the Red Rocks area out there. There's vehicles unchecked and it's used all over the place. That's not true. In fact, of the mileage that we're considering here, so it's just, we'll do a simple calculation to show the reality and the context of this. There's over 1,000 miles, just barely over 1,000 miles that the BLM is considering in this travel management project. So let's do a little bit of math here to make the context usable, to get a really good idea about what we're talking about. And all this information is contained in the introduction, section 1 of the scoping report for this travel management plan. And they flat out say the area covers 303,993 acres. That's the size of the project area. And they have inventoried 1,232 miles of inventoried routes here, the BLM managed lands in the project area. So then it's simple. We can make an area that's covered by 1,232 miles and then compare that back to the overall size of the project area that is 303,993 acres. So just almost 304,000 acres. So check this out. 1,232 miles, linear miles, straight miles of roads and trails. And we know there's 5,280 feet in a mile. So if we multiply 5,280 by that number, we will get how many linear feet they are. And then let's convert that to an area. So let's assume that we are dealing with 12 feet wide. Now, normally, a vehicle only takes up seven and a half feet, because a single vehicle will fit in an 8-foot garage door. But let's go out 12 feet so that we could, if a vehicle pulled to the side, or if the trail's been widened a little bit. So let's even take it wider than just the width of a vehicle that many of these roads and trails are. So we'll multiply our 5,280 feet to get us linear feet by the mileage that we have here. And then we'll multiply that by 12 so that we get an area for all of that. And then we'll take that square footage area and use an equation to convert it back to how many acres that equals. Do you know how many acres that equals? That 1,200-ish linear miles by 12 feet wide? That is 1,000. This is a whopping number. You're going to be astounded. 1,792 acres. And that number is 1/2 of 1%. That's it. That's the overall area that roads are taking up in this travel management project. 1/2 of 1%. So no, there are not roads everywhere. There's not motorized users everywhere. Vehicles are not causing issues everywhere. There is not user conflict everywhere. All of those arguments are absolutely utter ridiculousness when you boil it down and look at the numbers. And there's also one more thing in this that is, pretty concerning, just from a reality standpoint, is that apparently sometime in the not so distant past, people have also forgotten how to read maps, specifically like a topographical map, because, Grand County referenced some special interest group information that is being used to try and close a number of the trails in this area, because the trails are within 1/2 mile of each other in some places, and then like 1 mile within, within 1 mile of each other in other places. And they're really assuming that, maybe we're talking about a travel management plan out in Kansas where you're driving around sections of farmland or something that have, 1 mile grids or 1/2 mile or even like a 1/4 mile. But I mean, you remember hearing about like the flat earthers who think the earth is totally flat and they're not in tune with science. But I guess what's going on here is there must be like some people that are flat mappers, right? Like, look at this map. This is one of our Stay the Trail maps from here in Colorado. And if you turn it sideways, it's totally flat. So if you look across that, you don't see, canyons and rock outcroppings. And oh, by the way, out in Moab, we have formations like buttes and towers. And we're talking about rims here, assuming that canyon rims and stuff. So just because a route is within 1/2 mile as the crow flies of another route doesn't mean that they go to the same place. It doesn't mean that they're unneeded. How many of you have driven out to Spring Canyon Point and looked down at the Green River and seen the road in the bottom that eventually goes up to Hey Joe Canyon? So you're kind of out there on that peninsula. You stand at the end, you look over the edge, and you can see the road coming down along the green and then going along the other side of the green too. And they put all of that in red because those roads are within 1/2 mile of each other, even though one's down in the bottom and one's clear up high on the cliff that I could see vehicles in the bottom, but you can't hear them. And the road in the bottom goes around a big bend. So they're saying that one side of the road is within 1/2 mile of the other side of the road in the canyon as it goes around a bend. Like, this stuff is absolutely nonsense. There's not just random roads on a flat plain up there that are right next to one another. There are topographical features. Nothing out there is perfectly flat. So roads go in canyon bottoms, go in wash bottoms, go around rock outcroppings, go on different sides of the ridge. And just because you look at a flat map and as the crow flies, it's within 1/2 mile of each other or 1 mile of each other, it doesn't matter. That's absolute nonsense. Okay, so here's the part where we tell you what to do. We need you to click the link that's accompanying this video that'll take you to the project page, and we need you to register a comment. And when you do that, we need you to register what is called a substantial comment. So an unsubstantial comment is just something that is not specific to their process and doesn't give them instruction or information about their process. It'd be like, please don't close trails. Or maybe you're not even that polite. Quit closing all the trails. And while that may very well be, legitimate criticism because that's what they're doing, they will not classify that as a substantial comment. The other thing we don't advocate here is by sending a form letter. And that means I type everything out for you and you copy and paste that into your own email generator and send that to them. They'll actually classify that as a single comment. So we need you to make substantial comments. And that means you tell them specific information and give them a recommendation. You say your name, a little background about yourself. I would include if you're a member of a club or a group, if you've done volunteer work, or if you are maybe not an active member in a small Jeep club, but maybe you're a Tread Lightly member, or maybe you're a core member, maybe you're a Red Rock four-wheeler member, maybe you're whatever member of a group, any group that you're part of. And if you do volunteer work, if you give back to and are an agency partner, be sure to include all of that. Be sure to include the time you spend in Moab, the money you spend in Moab, the amount of times you're out on the trails in Moab, why you love these trails, why you love the area, and how you use the area. And if you've never been there before, tell them that you're planning on going because this is an awesome area. Tell them all of those things and then give them a recommendation. You need to recommend alternative A. There's already been enough closures in this area and no more closures are warranted. There are no problems. Alternative A recommends active management, and that's what should move forward, is the way that the BLM is currently managing the road and trail system. And the other thing that's very important, we talked about a lot of details in this video, and you don't have to include every specific detail. If you follow the steps I laid out for comments to make sure you register a substantial comment, you can also reference other comments. You can say, I support the comments that are made by TPA. I support the comments by Ride With Respect. I support the comments from CORE and Colorado Off-Road Trail Defenders and Colorado Off-Highway Vehicle Coalition, COVCO. Then we can go through and we will make very specific, very detailed comments and legal arguments for what they're doing wrong. And if you register a comment about your own experience and you have a very substantial individual comment, and then you reference that you support our comments, then you even strengthen your case. And that's what we're asking you to do. Submit something specific and substantial about yourself and why these trails should stay open and what your direction is to the BLM, and that you also support our comments, then that will have the greatest impact. I would also mention, if you're not just a casual user, maybe you own a business, maybe you test products out there, maybe you're in industry, maybe you took the new Ford Broncos out there to test them in Moab. Maybe you take the Jeeps out there and test them in Moab. Maybe you're part of a larger group that does a tremendous amount of research and testing there in Moab. They need to know about that. Everybody needs to know about that. The BLM has no idea the extent that those trails are used and why. And it's up to us to tell them that.